Chapter 3. Money, or the Circulation of Commodities. Section 1. The Measure of Values. Throughout this work, I assume that gold is the money commodity, for the sake of simplicity. The first main function of gold is to supply commodities with the material for the expression of their values, or to represent their values as magnitudes of the same denomination, qualitatively equal and quantitatively comparable. It thus acts as a universal measure of value, and only through performing this function does gold, the specific equivalent commodity, become money. It is not money that renders the commodities commensurable. Quite the contrary, because all commodities, as values, are objectified human labor, and therefore in themselves commensurable, their values can be communally measured in one and the same specific commodity, and this commodity can be converted into the common measure of their values, that is, into money. Money, as a measure of value, is the necessary form of appearance of the measure of value which is immanent in commodities, namely labor time. The expression of the value of a commodity in gold, X commodity A equals Y money commodity, is its money form, or price. A single equation, such as 1 ton of iron equals 2 ounces of gold, now suffices to express the value of the iron in a socially valid manner. There is no longer any need for this equation to figure as a link in the chain of equations that express the values of all other commodities, because the equivalent commodity, gold, already possesses the character of money. The general relative form of value of commodities has therefore resumed its original shape of simple or individual relative value. On the other hand, the expanded relative expression of value, the endless series of equations, has now become the specific relative form of value of the money commodity. However, the endless series itself is now a socially given fact in the shape of the prices of commodities. We have only to read the quotations of a price list backwards to find the magnitude of the value of money expressed in all sorts of commodities. As against this, money has no price. In order to form a part of this uniform relative form of value of the other commodities, it would have to be brought into relation with itself as its own equivalent. The price, or money form of commodities is, like their form of value generally, quite distinct from their palpable and real bodily form. It is therefore a purely ideal or notional form. Although invisible, the value of iron, linen, and corn exists in these very articles. It is signified through their equality with gold, even though this relation with gold exists only in their heads, so to speak. The guardian of the commodities must therefore lend them his tongue, or hang a ticket on them, in order to communicate their prices to the outside world. Since the expression of the value of commodities in gold is a purely ideal act, we may use purely imaginary or ideal gold to perform this operation. Every owner of commodities knows that he is nowhere near turning them into gold when he has given their value the form of a price or of imaginary gold, and that it does not require the tiniest particle of real gold to give a valuation in gold of millions of pounds worth of commodities. In its function as measure of value, money therefore serves only in an imaginary or ideal capacity. This circumstance has given rise to the wildest theories. But although the money that performs the functions of a measure of value is only imaginary, the price depends entirely on the actual substance that is money. The value, i.e. the quantity of human labor which is contained in a ton of iron, is expressed by an imaginary quantity of the money commodity which contains the same amount of labor as the iron. Therefore, according to whether it is gold, silver, or copper which is serving as the measure of value, the value of the ton of iron will be expressed by very different prices, or will be represented by very different quantities of those metals. If, therefore, two different commodities, such as gold and silver, serve simultaneously as measures of value, all commodities will have two separate price expressions, the price in gold and the price in silver, which will quietly coexist as long as the ratio of the value of silver to that of gold remains unchanged, say at 15:1. However, every alteration in this ratio disturbs the ratio between the gold prices and the silver prices of commodities, and thus proves in fact that a duplication of the measure of value contradicts the function of that measure. Commodities with definite prices all appear in this form. A commodity A equals X gold, B commodity B equals Y gold, C commodity C equals Z gold, etc., where A, B, and C represent definite quantities of the commodities A, B, and C, and X, Y, and Z definite quantities of gold. The values of these commodities are therefore changed into imaginary quantities of gold of different magnitudes. Hence, in spite of the confusing variety of the commodities themselves, their values become magnitudes of the same denomination, gold magnitudes. As such, they are now capable of being compared with each other and measured. and the course of development produces the need to compare them, for technical reasons, with some fixed quantity of gold as their unit of measurement. This unit, by subsequent division into aliquot parts, becomes itself the standard of measurement. Before they become money, gold, silver, and copper already possess such standards in their weights, so that, for example, a pound, which serves as a unit of measurement, can on the one hand be divided into ounces, and on the other hand combined with others to make up hundredweights. It is owing to this that, in all metallic currencies, the names given to the standards of money or of price were originally taken from the pre-existing names of the standards of weight. As measure of value, and as standard of price, money performs two quite different functions. It is the measure of value as the social incarnation of human labor. It is the standard of price as a quantity of metal with a fixed weight. As the measure of value, it serves to convert the values of all the manifold commodities into prices, into imaginary quantities of gold. As the standard of price, it measures those quantities of gold. The measure of values measures commodities considered as values. The standard of price measures, on the contrary, quantities of gold by a unit quantity of gold, not the value of one quantity of gold by the weight of another. For the standard of price, a certain weight of gold must be fixed as the unit of measurement. In this case, as in all cases where quantities of the same denomination are to be measured, the stability of the measurement is of decisive importance. Hence, the less the unit of measurement, here a quantity of gold, is subject to variation, the better the standard of price fulfills its office. But gold can serve as a measure of value only because it is itself a product of labor, and therefore potentially variable in value. It is first of all quite clear that a change in the value of gold in no way impairs its function as a standard of price. No matter how the value of gold varies, different quantities of gold always remain in the same value relation to each other. If the value of gold fell by 1,000%, 12 ounces of gold would continue to have 12 times the value of 1 ounce of gold. And when we are dealing with prices, we are only concerned with the relation between different quantities of gold. Since, on the other hand, an ounce of gold undergoes no change in weight when its value rises or falls, no change can take place in the weight of its aliquot parts. Thus, gold always renders the same service as a fixed measure of price, however much its value may vary. Moreover, a change in the value of gold does not prevent it from fulfilling its function as measure of value. The change affects all commodities simultaneously, and therefore, other things being equal, leaves the mutual relations between their values unaltered, although those values are now all expressed in higher or lower gold prices than before. Just as in the case of the estimation of the value of a commodity in the use value of any other commodity, so also in this case, where commodities are valued in gold, we assume nothing more than that the production of a given quantity of gold costs, at a given period, a given amount of labor. As regards the fluctuations of commodity prices in general, they're subject to the laws of the simple relative expression of value which we developed in an earlier chapter. A general rise in the prices of commodities can result either from a rise in their values, which happens when the value of money remains constant, or from a fall in the value of money, which happens when the values of commodities remain constant. The process also occurs in reverse. A general fall in prices can result either from a fall in the values of commodities, if the value of money remains constant, or from a rise in the value of money, if the values of the commodities remain constant. It therefore by no means follows that a rise in the value of money necessarily implies a proportional fall in the prices of commodities, or that a fall in the value of money implies a proportional rise in prices. This would hold only for commodities whose value remains constant. But commodities whose value rises simultaneously with, and in proportion to, that of money would retain the same price. And if their value rose either slower or faster than that of money, the fall or rise in their prices would be determined by the difference between the path described by their value and that described by the value of money, and so on. Let us now go back to considering the price form. For various reasons, the money names of the metal weights are gradually separated from their original weight names. The historically decisive reasons being 1. The introduction of foreign money among less developed peoples. This happened at Rome in its early days, where gold and silver coins circulated at first as foreign commodities. The names of these foreign coins were different from those of the indigenous weights. 2. With the development of material wealth, the more precious metal extrudes the less precious from its function as measure of value. Silver drives out copper, gold drives out silver, however much this sequence may contradict the chronology of the poets. The word pound, for instance, was the money name given to an actual pound weight of silver. As soon as gold had driven out silver as a measure of value, the same name became attached to, say, 1/15 of a pound of gold, depending on the ratio between the values of gold and silver. Pound as a money name and pound as the ordinary weight name of gold are now two different things. 3. Centuries of continuous debasement of the currency by kings and princes have in fact left nothing behind of the original weights of gold coins but their names. These historical processes have made the separation of the money name from the weight name into a fixed popular custom. Since the standard of money is on the one hand purely conventional, while on the other hand it must possess universal validity, it is in the end regulated by law. A given weight of one of the precious metals, an ounce of gold for instance, becomes officially divided into aliquot parts, baptized by the law as a pound, a thaler, etc. These aliquot parts, which then serve as the actual units of money, are subdivided into other aliquot parts with legal names, such as a shilling, a penny, etc. But despite this, a definite weight of metal remains the standard of metallic money. All that is changed is the subdivision and the denomination of the money. The prices, or quantities of gold, into which the values of commodities are ideally changed, are therefore now expressed in the money names, or the legally valid names of the subdivision of the gold standard made for the purpose of reckoning. Hence, instead of saying that a quarter of wheat is worth an ounce of gold, people in England would say that it was worth 3 pounds 17 shillings 10.5 pence. In this way, commodities express by their money names how much they are worth, and money serves as money of account whenever it is a question of fixing a thing as a value and therefore in its money form. The name of a thing is entirely external to its nature. I know nothing of a man if I merely know his name is Jacob. In the same way, every trace of the money relation disappears in the money names pound, thaler, franc, ducat, etc. The confusion caused by attributing a hidden meaning to these Kabbalistic signs is made even greater by the fact that these money names express both the values of commodities and simultaneously aliquot parts of a certain weight of metal, namely the weight of the metal which serves as the standard of money. On the other hand, it is in fact necessary that value, as opposed to the multifarious objects of the world of commodities, should develop into this form, a material and non-mental one, but also a simple social form. Price is the money name of the labor objectified in a commodity. Hence, the expression of the equivalence of a commodity with the quantity of money whose name is that commodity's price is a tautology, just as the expression of the relative value of a commodity is an expression of the equivalence of two commodities. But although price, being the exponent of the magnitude of a commodity's value, is the exponent of its exchange ratio with money, it does not follow that the exponent of this exchange ratio is necessarily the exponent of the magnitude of the commodity's value. Suppose two equal quantities of socially necessary labor are respectively represented by 1/4 of wheat and 2 pounds sterling, approximately half an ounce of gold. 2 pounds is the expression in money of the magnitude of the value of the quarter of wheat, or its price. If circumstances now allow this price to be raised to 3 pounds, or compel it to be reduced to 1 pound, then although 1 pound and 3 pounds may be too small or too large to give proper expression to the magnitude of the wheat's value, they are nevertheless prices of the wheat, for they are, in the first place, the form of its value, i.e. money, and in the second place, the exponents of its exchange ratio with money. If the conditions of production, or the productivity of labor, remain constant, the same amount of social labor time must be expended on the reproduction of a quarter of wheat both before and after the change in price. This situation is not dependent either on the will of the wheat producer or on that of the owners of the other commodities. The magnitude of the value of a commodity therefore expresses a necessary relation to social labor time, which is inherent in the process by which its value is created. With the transformation of the magnitude of value into the price, this necessary relation appears as the exchange ratio between a single commodity and the money commodity which exists outside it. This relation, however, may express both the magnitude of value of the commodity and the greater or lesser quantity of money for which it can be sold under the given circumstances. The possibility, therefore, of a quantitative incongruity between price and magnitude of value, i.e. the possibility that the price may diverge from the magnitude of value, is inherent in the price form itself. This is not a defect, but on the contrary, it makes this form the adequate one for a mode of production whose laws can only assert themselves as blindly operating averages between constant irregularities. The price form, however, is not only compatible with the possibility of a quantitative incongruity between the magnitude of value and price, i.e. between the magnitude of value and its own expression in money, but it may also harbor a qualitative contradiction, with the result that price ceases altogether to express value, despite the fact that money is nothing but the value form of commodities. Things which in and for themselves are not commodities, things such as conscience, honor, etc., can be offered for sale by their holders, and thus acquire the form of commodities through their price. Hence a thing can, formally speaking, have a price without having a value. The expression of price is in this case imaginary, like certain quantities in mathematics. On the other hand, the imaginary price form may also conceal a real value relation, or one derived from it, as for instance the price of uncultivated land, which is without value because no human labor is objectified in it. Like the relative form of value in general, price expresses the value of a commodity, for instance a ton of iron, by asserting that a given quantity of the equivalent, for instance an ounce of gold, is directly exchangeable with iron. But it by no means asserts the converse, that the iron is directly exchangeable with gold. In order, therefore, that a commodity may in practice operate effectively as exchange value, it must divest itself of its natural physical body and become transformed from merely imaginary into real gold, although this act of transubstantiation may be more troublesome for it than the transition from necessity to freedom for the Hegelian concept, the casting of a shell for a lobster, or the putting off of the old Adam for St. Jerome. Though a commodity may, alongside its real shape, iron, for instance, possess an ideal value shape, or an imagined gold shape in the form of its price, it cannot simultaneously be both real iron and real gold. To establish its price, it is sufficient for it to be equated with gold in the imagination, but to enable it to render its owner the service of a universal equivalent, it must actually be replaced by gold. If the owner of the iron were to go to the owner of some other earthly commodity, and were to refer him to the price of iron as proof that it was already money, his answer would be the terrestrial equivalent of the answer given by St. Peter in heaven to Dante, when the latter recited the creed, quote, "Now this coin has been measured, and now we know its alloy and its weight, but tell me if you have it in your purse." End quote. The price form therefore implies both the exchangeability of commodities for money and the necessity of exchanges. On the other hand, gold serves as an ideal measure of value only because it has already established itself as the money commodity in the process of exchange. Hard cash lurks within the ideal measure of value. Section 2. The means of circulation. Subsection A. The metamorphosis of commodities. We saw in a former chapter that the exchange of commodities implies contradictory and mutually exclusive conditions. The further development of the commodity does not abolish these contradictions, but rather provides the form within which they have room to move. This is, in general, the way in which real contradictions are resolved. For instance, it is a contradiction to depict one body as constantly falling towards another and at the same time constantly flying away from it. The ellipse is a form of motion within which this contradiction is both realized and resolved. Insofar as the process of exchange transfers commodities from hands in which they are non-use values to hands in which they are use values, it is a process of social metabolism. The product of one kind of useful labor replaces that of another. Once a commodity has arrived at a situation in which it can serve as a use value, it falls out of the sphere of exchange into that of consumption. But the former sphere alone interests us here. We therefore have to consider the whole process in its formal aspect, that is to say, the change in form or the metamorphosis of commodities through which the social metabolism is mediated. This change of form has been very imperfectly grasped as yet, owing to the circumstance that, quite apart from the lack of clarity in the concept of value itself, every change of form in a commodity results from the exchange of two commodities, namely an ordinary commodity and the money commodity. If we keep in mind only this material aspect, that is, the exchange of the commodity for gold, we overlook the very thing we ought to observe, namely, what has happened to the form of the commodity. We do not see that gold, as a mere commodity, is not money, and that the other commodities, through their prices, themselves relate to gold as the medium for expressing their own shape in money. Commodities first enter into the process of exchange ungilded and unsweetened, retaining their original homegrown shape. Exchange, however, produces a differentiation of the commodity into two elements, commodity and money, an external opposition which expresses the opposition between use value and value which is inherent in it. In this opposition, commodities as use values confront money as exchange value. On the other hand, both sides of this opposition are commodities, hence themselves unities of use value and value. But this unity of differences is expressed at two opposite poles, and at each pole in an opposite way. This is the alternating relation between the two poles. The commodity is in reality a use value. Its existence as a value appears only ideally in its price, through which it is related to the real embodiment of its value, the gold which confronts it as its opposite. Inversely, the material of the gold ranks only as the materialization of value, as money. It is therefore in reality exchange value. Its use value appears only ideally in the series of expressions of relative value within which it confronts all the other commodities as the totality of real embodiments of its unity. These antagonistic forms of the commodities are the real forms of motion of the process of exchange. Let us now accompany the owner of some commodity, say our old friend the linen weaver, to the scene of action, the market. His commodity, 20 yards of linen, has a definite price, £2. He exchanges it for the £2, and then, being a man of the old school, he parts with the £2 in return for a family Bible of the same price. The linen, for him a mere commodity, a bearer of value, is alienated in the exchange for gold, which is the shape of the linen's value. Then it is taken out of this shape and alienated again in exchange for another commodity, the Bible, which is destined to enter the weaver's house as an object of utility and there to satisfy his family's need for edification. The process of exchange is therefore accomplished through two metamorphoses of opposite, yet mutually complementary character: the conversion of the commodity into money and the reconversion of the money into a commodity. The two moments of this metamorphosis are at once distinct transactions by the weaver: selling, or the exchange of the commodity for money, and buying, or the exchange of the money for a commodity, and the unity of the two acts, selling in order to buy. The end result of the transaction, from the point of view of the weaver, is that instead of being in possession of the linen, he now has the Bible. Instead of his original commodity, he now possesses another of the same value but of different utility. He procures his other means of subsistence and of production in a similar way. For the weaver, the whole process accomplishes nothing more than the exchange of the product of his labor for the product of someone else's, nothing more than an exchange of products. The process of exchange is therefore accomplished through the following changes of form: commodity to money to commodity, or C to M to C. As far as concerns its material content, the movement is C to C, the exchange of one commodity for another, the metabolic interaction of social labor in whose result the process itself becomes extinguished. C to M, the first metamorphosis of the commodity, or sale. The leap taken by value from the body of the commodity into the body of the gold is the commodity's salto mortale, as I have called it elsewhere. If the leap falls short, it is not the commodity which is defrauded, but rather its owner. The social division of labor makes the nature of his labor as one-sided as his needs are many-sided. This is precisely the reason why the product of his labor serves him solely as exchange value. But it cannot acquire universal social validity as an equivalent form except by being converted into money. That money, however, is in someone else's pocket. To allow it to be drawn out, the commodity produced by its owner's labor must above all be a use value for the owner of the money. The labor expended on it must therefore be of a socially useful kind, i.e., it must maintain its position as a branch of the social division of labor. But the division of labor is an organization of production which has grown up naturally, a web which has been and continues to be woven behind the backs of the producers of commodities. Perhaps the commodity is the product of a new kind of labor, and claims to satisfy a newly arisen need, or is even trying to bring forth a new need of its own account. Perhaps a particular operation, although yesterday it still formed one out of the many operations conducted by one producer in creating a given commodity, may today tear itself out of this framework, establish itself as an independent branch of labor, and send its part of the product to the market as an independent commodity. The circumstances may or may not be ripe for such a process of separation. Today, the product satisfies a social need. Tomorrow it may perhaps be expelled partly or completely from its place by a similar product. Moreover, although our weaver's labor may be a recognized branch of the social division of labor, yet that fact is by no means sufficient to guarantee the utility of his 20 yards of linen. If the society's need for linen, and such a need has a limit like every other need, has already been satisfied by the products of rival weavers, our friend's product is superfluous, redundant, and consequently useless. Although people do not look a gift horse in the mouth, our friend does not frequent the markets to make presents of his products. Let us assume, however, that the use value of his product does maintain itself, and that the commodity therefore attracts money. Now we have to ask, how much money? No doubt the answer is already anticipated in the price of the commodity, which is the exponent of the magnitude of its value. We leave out of consideration here any possible subjective errors in calculation by the owner of the commodity, which will immediately be corrected objectively in the market. We suppose him to have spent on his product only the average socially necessary quantity of labor time. The price of the commodity, therefore, is merely the money name of the quantity of social labor objectified in it. But now the old established conditions of production and weaving are thrown into the melting pot, without the permission of, and behind the back of, our weaver. What was yesterday undoubtedly labor time socially necessary to the production of a yard of linen ceases to be so today, a fact which the owner of money is only too eager to prove from the price quoted by our friend's competitors. Unluckily for the weaver, people of his kind are in plentiful supply. Let us suppose, finally, that every piece of linen on the market contains nothing but socially necessary labor time. In spite of this, all these pieces, taken as a whole, may contain superfluously expended labor time. If the market cannot stomach the whole quantity at the normal price of 2 shillings a yard, this proves that too great a portion of the total social labor time has been expended in the form of weaving. The effect is the same as if each individual weaver had expended more labor time on his particular product than was socially necessary. As the German proverb has it, caught together, hung together. All the linen on the market counts as one single article of commerce, and each piece of linen is only an aliquot part of it. And in fact, the value of each single yard is also nothing but the materialization of the same socially determined quantity of homogeneous human labor. We see then that commodities are in love with money, but that the course of true love never did run smooth. The quantitative articulation of society's productive organism, by which its scattered elements are integrated into the system of the division of labor, is as haphazard and spontaneous as its qualitative articulation. The owners of commodities therefore find out that the same division of labor which turns them into independent private producers also makes the social process of production and the relations of the individual producers to each other within that process independent of the producers themselves. They also find out that the independence of the individuals from each other has as its counterpart and supplement a system of all-round material dependence. The division of labor converts the product of labor into a commodity, and thereby makes necessary its conversion into money. At the same time, it makes it a matter of chance whether this transubstantiation succeeds or not. Here, however, we have to look at the phenomenon in its pure shape, and must therefore assume it has proceeded normally. In any case, if the process is to take place at all, i.e. if the commodity is not impossible to sell, a change of form must always occur, although there may be an abnormal loss or accretion of substance, that is, of the magnitude of value. The seller has his commodity replaced by gold. The buyer has his gold replaced by a commodity. The striking phenomenon here is that a commodity and gold, 20 yards of linen and 2 pounds, have changed hands and places. In other words, they have been exchanged. But what is the commodity exchanged for? For the universal shape assumed by its own value. And what is the gold exchanged for? For a particular form of its own use value. Why does the gold confront the linen as money? Because the linen's price of 2 pounds, its money name, already brings it into relation with the gold as money. The commodity is divested of its original form through its sale, i.e. the moment its use value actually attracts the gold, which previously had a merely imaginary existence in its price. The realization of a commodity's price, or of its merely ideal value form, is therefore at the same time and inversely the realization of the merely ideal use value of money. The conversion of a commodity into money is the conversion of money into a commodity. This single process is two-sided. From one pole, that of the commodity owner, it is a sale. From the other pole, that of the money owner, it is a purchase. In other words, a sale is a purchase. C to M is also M to C. Up to this point, we have considered only one economic relation between men, a relation between owners of commodities in which they appropriate the produce of the labor of others by alienating the produce of their own labor. Hence, for one commodity owner to meet with another, in the form of a money owner, it is necessary either that the product of the latter should possess by its nature the form of money, i.e. it should be gold, the material of which money consists, or that his product should already have changed its skin and stripped off its original form of a useful object. In order to function as money, gold must of course enter the market at some point or other. This point is to be found at its source of production, where the gold is exchanged as the immediate product of labor for some other product of equal value. But from that moment onwards, it always represents the realized price of some commodity. Leaving aside its exchange for other commodities at the source of production, Gold is, in the hands of every commodity owner, his own commodity, divested of its original shape by being alienated. It is the product of a sale, or of the first metamorphosis C to M. Gold, as we saw, became ideal money, or a measure of value, because all commodities measured their values in it, and thus made it the imaginary opposite of their natural shape as objects of utility, hence the shape of their value. It became real money because the commodities, through their complete alienation, suffered a divestiture or transformation of their real shapes as objects of utility, thus making it the real embodiment of their values. When they thus assume the shape of values, commodities strip off every trace of their natural and original use value, and of the particular kind of useful labor to which they owe their creation, in order to pupate into the homogeneous social materialization of undifferentiated human labor. From the mere look of a piece of money, we cannot tell what breed of commodity has been transformed into it. In their money form, all commodities look alike. Hence money may be dirt, although dirt is not money. We will assume that the 2 golden coins, in return for which our weaver has parted with his linen, are the metamorphosed shape of a quarter of wheat. The sale of the linen, C to M, is at the same time its purchase, M to C. But this process, considered as the sale of the linen, starts off a movement which ends with its opposite, the purchase of a Bible. Considered as a purchase of the linen, on the other hand, the process completes a movement which began with its opposite, the sale of the wheat. C to M, linen to money, which is the first phase of CMC, linen to money to Bible, is also M to C, money to linen, the last phase of another movement, C to M to C, being wheat to money to linen. The first metamorphosis of one commodity, its transformation from the commodity form into money, is therefore also invariably the second, and diametrically opposite, metamorphosis of some other commodity, the retransformation of the latter from money into a commodity. M to C, the second or concluding metamorphosis of the commodity, purchase. Money is the absolutely alienable commodity, because it is all other commodities, divested of their shape, the product of their universal alienation. It reads all prices backwards, and thus, as it were, mirrors itself in the bodies of all other commodities, which provide the material through which it can come into being as a commodity. At the same time, the prices, those wooing glances cast at money by commodities, define the limit of its convertibility, namely its own quantity. Since every commodity disappears when it becomes money, it is impossible to tell from the money itself how it got into the hands of its possessor, or what article has been changed into it. It has no smell, from whatever source it may come. If it represents on the one hand a commodity which has been sold, it also represents on the other hand a commodity which can be bought. M to C, a purchase, is at the same time C to M, a sale. The concluding metamorphosis of one commodity is the first metamorphosis of another. For our weaver, the life of his commodity ends with the Bible, into which he has reconverted his 2 pounds. But suppose the seller of the Bible turns the 2 pounds set free by the weaver into brandy. M to C, the concluding phase of CMC being linen to money to Bible, is also C to M, the first phase of C to M to C being Bible to money to brandy. Since the producer of the commodity offers only a single product, he often sells it in large quantities, whereas the fact that he has many needs compels him to split up the price realized, the sum of the money set free, into numerous purchases. Hence, a sale leads to many purchases of different commodities. The concluding metamorphosis of a commodity thus constitutes an aggregate of the first metamorphoses of other commodities. If we now consider the completed metamorphosis of a commodity as a whole, it appears in the first place that it is made up of 2 opposite and complementary movements, C to M and M to C. These 2 antithetical transmutations of the commodity are accomplished through 2 antithetical social processes in which the commodity owner takes part, and are reflected in the antithetical economic characteristics of the 2 processes. By taking part in the act of sale, the commodity owner becomes a seller. In the act of purchase, he becomes a buyer. But just as, in every transmutation of a commodity, its 2 forms, the commodity form and the money form, exist simultaneously but at opposite poles, so every seller is confronted with a buyer, every buyer with a seller. While the same commodity is successively passing through the 2 inverted transmutations, from a commodity into money and from money into another commodity, the owner of the commodity successively changes his role from seller to buyer. Being a seller and being a buyer are therefore not fixed roles, but constantly attach themselves to different persons in the course of the circulation of commodities. The complete metamorphosis of a commodity, in its simplest form, implies 4 denouements and 3 dramatis personae. First, a commodity comes face to face with money. The latter is the form taken by the value of the former, and exists over there in someone else's pocket in all its hard material reality. A commodity owner is thus confronted with a money owner. Now, as soon as the commodity has been changed into money, the money becomes its vanishing equivalent form, whose use value or content exists here on the spot, in the bodies of other commodities. Money, the final stage of the first transformation, is at the same time the starting point for the second. The person who is a seller in the first transaction thus becomes a buyer in the second, in which a third commodity owner comes to meet him as a seller. The 2 inverted faces of the movement, which makes up the metamorphosis of a commodity, constitute a circuit. Commodity form, stripping off of this form, and return to it. Of course, the commodity itself is here subject to contradictory determinations. At the starting point, it is a non-use value to its owner. At the end, it is a use value. So too, the money appears in the first phase as a solid crystal of value into which the commodity has been transformed, but afterwards it dissolves into the mere equivalent form of the commodity. The 2 metamorphoses which constitute the commodity's circular path are at the same time 2 inverse partial metamorphoses of 2 other commodities. One in the same commodity, the linen, opens the series of its own metamorphoses and completes the metamorphosis of another, the wheat. In its first transmutation, the sale, the linen plays these 2 parts in its own person. But then it goes the way of all flesh, enters the chrysalis state as gold, and thereby simultaneously completes the first metamorphosis of a third commodity. Hence, the circuit made by one commodity in the course of its metamorphoses is inextricably entwined with the circuits of other commodities. This whole process constitutes the circulation of commodities. The circulation of commodities differs from the direct exchange of products not only in form but in its essence. We have only to consider the course of events. The weaver has undoubtedly exchanged his linen for a Bible, his own commodity for someone else's, but this phenomenon is only true for him. The Bible pusher, who prefers a warming drink to cold sheets, had no intention of exchanging linen for his Bible. The weaver did not know that the wheat had been exchanged for his linen. B's commodity replaces that of A, but A and B do not mutually exchange their commodities. It may in fact happen that A and B buy from each other, but a particular relationship of this kind is by no means the necessary result of the general conditions of the circulation of commodities. We see here, on the one hand, how the exchange of commodities breaks through all the individual and local limitations of the direct exchange of products, and develops the metabolic process of human labor. On the other hand, there develops a whole network of social connections of natural origin, entirely beyond the control of the human agents. Only because the farmer has sold his wheat is the weaver able to sell his linen. Only because the weaver has sold his linen is our rash and intemperate friend able to sell his Bible, and only because the latter already has the water of everlasting life is the distiller able to sell his eau de vie. And so it goes on. The process of circulation, therefore, unlike the direct exchange of products, does not disappear from view once the use values have changed places and changed hands. The money does not vanish when it finally drops out of the series of metamorphoses undergone by a commodity. It always leaves behind a precipitate at a point in the arena of circulation vacated by the commodities. In the complete metamorphosis of the linen, for example, linen to money to Bible, the linen first falls out of circulation and money steps into its place. Then the Bible falls out of circulation and again money takes its place. When one commodity replaces another, the money commodity always sticks to the hands of some third person. Circulation sweats money from every pore. Nothing could be more foolish than the dogma that because every sale is a purchase and every purchase a sale, the circulation of commodities necessarily implies an equilibrium between sales and purchases. If this means that the number of actual sales accomplished is equal to the number of purchases, it is a flat tautology. But its real intention is to show that every seller brings his own buyer to market with him. Sale and purchase are one identical act, considered as the alternating relation between two persons who are in polar opposition to each other, the commodity owner and the money owner. They constitute two acts of polar and opposite character, considered as the transactions of one and the same person. Hence, the identity of sale and purchase implies that the commodity is useless if, when it is thrown into the alchemist's retort of circulation, it does not come out again as money. If, in other words, it cannot be sold by its owner, and therefore bought by the owner of the money. This identity further implies that the process, if it reaches fruition, constitutes a point of rest, an interval, long or short, in the life of the commodity. Since the first metamorphosis of a commodity is at once a sale and a purchase, this partial process is at the same time an independent process in itself. The buyer has the commodity, the seller has the money, i.e. a commodity which remains in a form capable of circulating, whether it reappears on the market at an earlier or later date. No one can sell unless someone else purchases, but no one directly needs to purchase because he has just sold. Circulation bursts through all the temporal, spatial, and personal barriers imposed by the direct exchange of products, and it does this by splitting up the direct identity present in this case between the exchange of one's own product and the acquisition of someone else's into two antithetical segments of sale and purchase. To say that these mutually independent and antithetical processes form an internal unity is to say also that their internal unity moves forward through external antitheses. These two processes lack internal independence because they complement each other. Hence, if the assertion of their external independence proceeds to a certain critical point, their unity violently makes itself felt by producing a crisis. There is an antithesis immanent in the commodity between use value and value, between private labor, which must simultaneously manifest itself as directly social labor, and a particular concrete kind of labor, which simultaneously counts as merely abstract universal labor, between the conversion of things into persons and the conversions of persons into things. The antithetical phases of the metamorphosis of the commodity are the developed forms of motion of this immanent contradiction. These forms therefore imply the possibility of crises, though no more than the possibility. For the development of this possibility into a reality, a whole series of conditions is required, which do not yet even exist from the standpoint of simple circulation of commodities. Subsection B the Circulation of Money. The change of form through which the metabolism of the products of labor is accomplished, C to M to C, requires that a given value shall form the starting point of the process, in the shape of a commodity, and that it shall return to the same point in the shape of a commodity. This movement of commodities is therefore a circuit. On the other hand, the form of this movement excludes money from the circuit. The result of the movement is not the return of the money, but its continued removal further and further away from its starting point. As long as the seller sticks fast to his money, which is the transformed shape of his commodity, that commodity is still at the stage of the first metamorphosis. In other words, it has compelled only the first half of its circulatory course. Once the process of selling in order to buy is complete, the money again leaves the hands of its original possessor. Of course, if the weaver, having bought the Bible, sells more linen, money comes back into his hands. But this return is not a result of the circulation of the first 20 yards of linen. That circulation rather removed money from the hands of the weaver and placed it in those of the Bible pusher. The return of money to the weaver results only from the renewal or repetition of the same process of circulation with a fresh commodity, and it ends in the same way as the previous process. Hence, the movement directly imparted to money by the circulation of commodities takes the form of a constant removal from its starting point, a path followed from the hands of one commodity owner into those of another. This path is its circulation. The circulation of money is the constant and monotonous repetition of the same process. The commodity is always in the hands of the seller. The money, as a means of purchase, always in the hands of the buyer. And money serves as a means of purchase by realizing the price of the commodity. By doing this, it transfers the commodity from the seller to the buyer, and removes the money from the hands of the buyer into those of the seller, where it again goes through the same process with another commodity. That this one-sided form of motion of the money arises out of the two-sided form of motion of the commodity is a circumstance which is hidden from view. The very nature of the circulation of commodities produces a semblance of the opposite. The first metamorphosis of a commodity is visibly not only the money's movement, but also that of the commodity itself. In the second metamorphosis, on the contrary, the movement appears to us as the movement of the money alone. In the first phase of its circulation, the commodity changes places with the money. Thereupon, the commodity, in its shape as an object of utility, falls out of circulation into consumption. Its value shape, or monetary larva, steps into its shoes. It then passes through the second phase of its circulation, no longer in its own natural shape, but in its monetary shape. With this, the continuity of the movement depends entirely on the money, and the same movement which, for the commodity, includes two opposed processes, is, when considered as the movement of the money, always one and the same process, a constant change of places with commodities which are always different. Hence, the result of the circulation of commodities, namely the replacement of one commodity by another, appears not to have been mediated by its own change of form, but rather by the function of money as means of circulation. As means of circulation, money circulates commodities, which in and for themselves lack the power of movement, and transfers them from hands in which they are non-use values into hands in which they are use values, and this process always takes the opposite direction to the path of the commodities themselves. Money constantly removes commodities from the sphere of circulation by constantly stepping into their place in circulation, and in this way continually moving away from its own starting point. Hence, although the movement of money is merely the expression of the circulation of commodities, the situation appears to be the reverse of this, namely the circulation of commodities seems to be the result of the movement of money. Again, money functions as a means of circulation only because in it the value possessed by the commodities has taken on an independent shape. Hence, its movement, as the medium of circulation, is in fact merely the movement undergone by commodities while changing their form. This fact must therefore make itself plainly visible in the circulation of money. Thus, the linen, for instance, first of all changes its commodity form into its money form. The final term of its metamorphosis, C to M, the money form, then becomes the first term of its final metamorphosis, M to C, its transformation back into the shape of the Bible. But each of these two changes of form is accomplished by an exchange between commodity and money, by their reciprocal displacement. The same pieces of coin come into the seller's hand as the alienated form of the commodity and leave it as the commodity in its absolutely alienable form. They are displaced twice. The first metamorphosis of the linen puts these coins into the weaver's pocket. The second draws them out of it. The two opposite changes undergone by the same commodity are reflected in the displacement, twice repeated but in opposite directions, of the same pieces of coin. If, however, only a one-sided metamorphosis takes place, if there are only sales or only purchases, then a given piece of money changes its place only once. Its second change of place always expresses the second metamorphosis of the commodity, its reconversion from money. The frequently repeated displacement of the same coins reflects not only the series of metamorphoses undergone by a single commodity, but also the mutual entanglement of the innumerable metamorphoses in the whole world of commodities. It is in any case evident that all this is valid only for the simple circulation of commodities, the form we are considering here. Every commodity, when it first steps into circulation and undergoes its first change of form, does so only to fall out of circulation once more and be replaced again and again by fresh commodities. Money, on the contrary, as the medium of circulation, haunts the sphere of circulation and constantly moves around within it. The question therefore arises of how much money this sphere continuously absorbs. In a given country, there takes place every day at the same time, though in different places, numerous one-sided metamorphoses of commodities. In other words, simple sales on one hand, simple purchases on the other. In their prices, the commodities have already been equated with definite but imaginary quantities of money. And since, in the direct form of circulation being considered here, money and commodities always come into physical confrontation with each other, one at the positive pole of purchase, the other at the negative pole of sale, it is clear that the amount of means of circulation required is determined beforehand by the sum of the prices of all these commodities. As a matter of fact, the money is only the representation in real life of the quantity of gold previously expressed in the imagination by the sum of the prices of the commodities. It is therefore self-evident that these two quantities are equal. We know, however, that the values of commodities remaining constant, their prices vary with the value of gold, the material of money, rising in proportion as it falls and falling in proportion as it rises. Given that the sum of the prices of commodities falls or rises in this way, it follows that the quantity of money in circulation must fall or rise to the same extent. This change in the quantity of the circulating medium is certainly caused by the money itself, yet not in virtue of its function as a medium of circulation, but rather in virtue of its function as a measure of value. First, the price of commodities varies inversely as the value of the money, and then the quantity of the medium of circulation varies directly as the price of the commodities. Exactly the same phenomenon would arise if, for instance, instead of the value of gold falling, silver were to replace it as the measure of value, or if instead of the value of silver rising, it were to be driven out of its function as measure of value by gold. In the one case, more silver would be in circulation than there was previously gold, and in the other case, less gold would be in circulation than there was previously silver. In each case, the value of the money material, i.e. the value of the commodity serving as the measure of value, would have undergone a change. And so too, therefore, would the prices of commodities which express their values in money, as well as the quantity of money which would need to be in circulation to realize those prices. We have already seen that the sphere of circulation has a gap in it, through which gold, or silver, or the money material in general, enters as a commodity with a given value. Hence, when money begins to function as a measure of value, when it is used to determine prices, its value is presupposed. If that value falls, the fall first shows itself in a change in the prices of those commodities which are directly exchanged with the precious metals at their source. The greater part of all other commodities, especially at the less developed stages of bourgeois society, will continue for a long time to be estimated in terms of the former value of the measure of value, which has now become antiquated and illusory. Nevertheless, one commodity infects another through their common value relation, so that their prices, expressed in gold or silver, gradually settle down into the proportions determined by their comparative values, until finally the values of all commodities are estimated in terms of the new value of the monetary metal. This process of equalization is accompanied by a continued increase in the quantity of the precious metals, owing to the influx needed to replace the commodities directly exchanged with them. In proportion, therefore, as the adjusted prices of the commodities become universal, in proportion as their values come to be estimated according to the new value of the metal, which has fallen and may up to a certain point continue to fall, in that same proportion does the increased mass of metal which is necessary for the realization of the new prices become available. A one-sided observation of the events which followed the discovery of fresh supplies of gold and silver led some people in the 17th and more particularly in the 18th century to the false conclusion that the prices of commodities had risen because there was more gold and silver acting as the means of circulation. Henceforth we shall assume the value of gold as a given factor, as in fact it is if we take it at the moment when we estimate the price of a commodity. On this assumption, then, the quantity of the medium of circulation is determined by the sum of the prices to be realized. If we now further assume that the price of each commodity is given, the sum of the prices clearly depends on the total amount of commodities found in circulation. We do not need to rack our brains to grasp that if our quarter of wheat costs £2, 100 quarters will cost £200, 200 quarters £400, and so on, and therefore that the quantity of money which changes place with the wheat, when it is sold, must increase as the quantity of the wheat increases. If the mass of commodities remains constant, the quantity of money in circulation surges up or down according to the fluctuations in the prices of the commodities. It rises and falls because the sum of the prices increases or diminishes as a result of the change of price. For this, it is by no means necessary that the prices of all commodities should rise or fall simultaneously. A rise or a fall in the prices of a number of leading articles is sufficient in the one case to increase, in the other to diminish, the sum of the prices of all commodities, and therefore to put more or less money in circulation. Whether the change in the price reflects an actual change in the value of the commodities, or merely fluctuations in their market prices, the effect on the quantity of the medium of circulation remains the same. Let us assume that there occur a number of unconnected and simultaneous sales, or partial metamorphoses in different localities. Sales of, say, 1 quarter of wheat, 20 yards of linen, 1 Bible, and 4 gallons of brandy. If the price of each article is £2, and the sum of the prices to be realized is consequently £8, it follows that £8 in money must enter into circulation. If, on the other hand, these same articles are links in the following chain of metamorphoses, 1 quarter of wheat into £2, into 20 yards of linen, into £2, into 1 Bible, into £2, into 4 gallons of brandy, into £2, a chain which is already well known to us, in that case, the £2 causes the different commodities to circulate after realizing their prices successively, and therefore realizing the sum of those prices, which is £8, the £2 finally comes to rest in the hands of the distiller. The £2 has turned over 4 times. It has performed 4 acts of circulation. This repeated change of place of the same pieces of money corresponds to the double change of the form undergone by the commodities. It corresponds to their movement through 2 diametrically opposed stages of circulation, and the intertwining of the metamorphoses of different commodities. These antithetical and mutually complementary phases, through which the process passes, cannot take place alongside each other. They must follow in temporal succession. It is segments of time, therefore, which form the measure of the duration of the process. In other words, the velocity of the circulation of money is measured by the number of times the same piece of money turns over within a given period. Suppose the process of circulation of the 4 articles takes a day. The sum of prices to be realized is £8. The number of times the £2 turns over during the day is 4, and the quantity of money in circulation is £2. Hence, for a given interval of time during the process of circulation, we have the following equation. The quantity of money functioning as the circulating medium is equal to the sum of the prices of the commodities divided by the number of times coins of the same denomination turn over. This law holds generally. The process of circulation in a given country is made up, on the one hand, of numerous isolated and simultaneous partial metamorphoses, sales and purchases running parallel to each other, in which each coin changes its position only once, or performs only one act of circulation. On the other hand, it is made up of many distinct series of metamorphoses, partly running parallel, partly coalescing with each other, and in each of these series, each coin turns over a number of times. How often each coin turns over varies according to the circumstances. Given the total number of times all the circulating coins of one denomination turn over, we can arrive at the average number of times a single coin turns over, or in other words, the average velocity of the circulation of money. The quantity of money thrown into the process of circulation at the beginning of each day is of course determined by the sum of the prices of all the commodities circulating simultaneously and side by side. But within that process, coins are, so to speak, made responsible for each other. If one increases its velocity of circulation, the other slows down or completely leaves the sphere of circulation. This is because the sphere of circulation can absorb only the amount of gold which, multiplied by the average number of times its basic unit turns over, is equal to the sum of prices to be realized. Hence, if the number of acts of circulation performed by the separate pieces increases, the total number of those pieces in circulation diminishes. If the number of acts of circulation diminishes, the total number of pieces increases. Since the quantity of money which can function as means of circulation is fixed for a given average velocity of circulation, one has only to throw a given quantity of £1 notes into circulation in order to extract the same number of sovereigns from it. This trick is well known to all banks. Just as the circulation of money is in general merely a reflection of the process of circulation of commodities, i.e. their circular path through diametrically opposed metamorphoses, so too the velocity of circulation of money is merely a reflection of the rapidity with which commodities change their forms, the continuous interlocking of the series of metamorphoses, the hurried nature of society's metabolic process, the quick disappearance of commodities from the sphere of circulation, and their equally quick replacement by fresh commodities. In the velocity of circulation, therefore, there appears the fluid unity of the antithetical and complementary phases, i.e. the transformation of the commodities from the form of utility into the form of value, and their retransformation in the reverse direction, or the two processes of sale and purchase. Inversely, when the circulation of money slows down, the two processes become separated. They assert their independence and mutual antagonism. Stagnation occurs in the changes of form, and hence in the metabolic process. The circulation itself, of course, gives no clue to the origin of this stagnation. It merely presents us with a phenomenon. Popular opinion is naturally inclined to attribute this phenomenon to a quantitative deficiency in the circulating medium, since it sees money appear and disappear less frequently at all points on the periphery of circulation, in proportion as the circulation of money slows down. The total quantity of money functioning during a given period as the circulating medium is determined on the one hand by the sum of the prices of the commodities in circulation, and on the other hand by the rapidity of the alternation of the antithetical processes of circulation. The proportion of the sum of the prices which can on average be realized by each single coin depends on this rapidity of alternation, but the sum of the prices of the commodities depends on the quantity, as well as on the price, of each kind of commodity. These three factors, the movement of prices, the quantity of commodities in circulation, and the velocity of circulation of money, can all vary in various directions under different conditions. Hence, the sum of the prices to be realized, and consequently the quantity of the circulating medium conditioned by that sum, will vary with the very numerous variations of the three factors in combination. Here we shall outline only the most important variations in the history of commodity prices. While prices remain constant, the quantity of the circulating medium may increase, owing to an increase in the number of commodities in circulation, or a decrease in the velocity of circulation of money, or a combination of the two. On the other hand, the quantity of the circulating medium may decrease with a decreasing number of commodities, or with an increasing rapidity of circulation. With a general rise in the prices of commodities, the quantity of the circulating medium will remain constant, if the number of commodities in circulation decreases proportionally to the increase in their prices, or if the velocity of monetary circulation increases at the same rate as prices rise, the number of commodities in circulation remaining constant. The quantity of the circulating medium may decrease, owing to a more rapid decrease in the number of commodities or to a more rapid increase in the velocity of monetary circulation in comparison with the fall in the prices of commodities. With the general fall in the prices of commodities, the quantity of the circulating medium will remain constant if the number of commodities increases proportionally to their fall in price, or if the velocity of monetary circulation decreases in the same proportion. The quantity of the circulating medium will increase if the number of commodities increases more quickly, or the rapidity of circulation decreases more quickly than the prices fall. The variations of the different factors may be mutually compensatory, so that notwithstanding their continued instability, the sum of the prices to be realized and the quantity of money in circulation remains constant. Consequently, we find, especially if we take long periods into consideration, that the quantity of money in circulation in each country diverges far less from its average level than we should at first sight have expected, with the exception of the violent perturbations which arise periodically, either from crises in production and commerce, or more rarely, from changes in the value of money itself. The law that the quantity of the circulating medium is determined by the sum of the prices of the commodities in circulation and the average velocity of the circulation of money may also be stated as follows. Given the sum of the values of commodities and the average rapidity of their metamorphoses, the quantity of money, or of the material of money in circulation, depends on its own value. The illusion that it is, on the contrary, prices which are determined by the quantity of the circulating medium, and that the latter, for its part, depends on the amount of monetary material which happens to be present in a country, had its roots in the absurd hypothesis adopted by the original representatives of this view that commodities enter into the process of circulation without a price, and money enters without a value, and that once they have entered circulation, an aliquot part of the medley of commodities is exchanged for an aliquot part of the heap of precious metals. Subsection C. Coin, the symbol of value. Money takes the shape of coin because of its function as the circulating medium. The weight of gold, represented in the imagination by the prices or money names of the commodities, has to confront those commodities, within circulation, as coins or pieces of gold of the same denomination. The business of coining, like the establishing of a standard measure of prices, is an attribute proper to the state. The different national uniforms worn at home by gold and silver as coins, but taken off again when they appear on the world market, demonstrate the separation between the internal or national spheres of commodity circulation and its universal sphere, the world market. The only difference, therefore, between coin and bullion lies in their physical configuration, and gold can at any time pass from one form to the other. For a coin, the road from the mint is also the path to the melting pot. In the course of circulation, coins wear down, some to a greater extent, some to a lesser. The denomination of the gold and its substance, the nominal content and the real content, begin to move apart. Coins of the same denomination become different in value because they are different in weight. The weight of gold fixed upon as the standard of prices diverges from the weight which serves as the circulating medium, and the latter thereby ceases to be a real equivalent of the commodities whose prices it realizes. The history of these difficulties constitutes the history of the coinage throughout the Middle Ages and in modern times down to the 18th century. The natural and spontaneous tendency of the process of circulation to transform the coin from its metallic existence as gold into the semblance of gold, or to transform the coin into a symbol of its official metallic content, is itself recognized by the most recent laws on the degree of metal loss which demonetizes a gold coin, i.e. renders it incapable of being circulated. The fact that the circulation of money itself splits the nominal content of coins away from their real content, dividing their metallic existence from their functional existence, this fact implies the latent possibility of replacing metallic money with tokens made of some other material, i.e. symbols which would perform the function of coins. The technical obstacles to coining, extremely minute quantities of gold and silver, and the circumstance that at first the less precious metal is used as the measure of value instead of the more precious, copper instead of silver, silver instead of gold, and that the less precious circulates as money until dethroned by the more precious, these facts provide a historical explanation for the role played by silver and copper tokens as substitute for gold coins. Silver and copper coins replace gold in those regions of the circulation of commodities where coins pass from hand to hand most rapidly, and are therefore worn out most quickly. This happens where sales and purchases on a very small scale recur unceasingly. In order to prevent these satellites from establishing themselves permanently in the place of gold, the law determines the very minute proportions in which alone they can be accepted as alternative payment. The particular tracks pursued by the different sorts of coin in circulation naturally run into each other. Small change appears alongside gold for the payment of fractional parts of the smallest gold coin. Gold constantly enters into retail circulation, although it is just as constantly being thrown out again by being exchanged with small change. The metallic content of silver and copper tokens is arbitrarily determined by law. In the course of circulation, they wear down even more rapidly than gold coins. Their function as coins is therefore, in practice, entirely independent of their weight, i.e., it is independent of all value. In its form of existence as coin, gold becomes completely divorced from the substance of its value. Relatively valueless objects, therefore, such as paper notes, can serve as coins in place of gold. This purely symbolic character of the currency is still somewhat disguised in the case of metal tokens. In paper money, it stands out plainly. But we can see, everything depends on the first step. Here we are concerned only with inconvertible paper money issued by the state and given forced currency. This money emerges directly out of the circulation of metallic money. Credit money, on the other hand, implies relations which are as yet totally unknown from the standpoint of the simple circulation of commodities. But it may be noted in passing that just as true paper money arises out of the function of money as the circulating medium, so does credit money take root spontaneously in the function of money as the means of payment. Pieces of paper on which money names are printed, such as £1, £5, etc., are thrown into the circulation process from outside by the state. Insofar as they actually circulate in place of the same amount of gold, their movement is simply a reflection of the laws of monetary circulation itself. A law peculiar to the circulation of paper money can only spring up from the proportion in which that paper money represents gold. In simple terms, the law referred to is as follows. The issue of paper money must be restricted to the quantity of gold, or silver, which would actually be in circulation, and which is represented symbolically by the paper money. Now it is true that the quantity of gold which can be absorbed by the sphere of circulation constantly fluctuates above and below a certain average level, but despite this, the mass of the circulating medium in a given country never sinks below a certain minimum, which can be ascertained by experience. The fact that this minimum mass continually undergoes changes in its constituent parts, or that the pieces of gold of which it consists are constantly being replaced by other pieces, naturally causes no change either in its amount or in the continuity with which it flows around the sphere of circulation. It can therefore be replaced by paper symbols. If, however, all the channels of circulation were today filled with paper money to the full extent of their capacity for absorbing money, they might the next day be overfull, owing to the fluctuation in the circulation of commodities. There would no longer be any standard. If the paper money exceeds its proper limit, i.e., the amount in gold coins of the same denomination which could have been in circulation, then quite apart from the danger of becoming universally discredited, it will still represent within the world of commodities only that quantity of gold which is fixed by its immanent laws. No greater quantity is capable of being represented. If the quantity of paper money represents twice the amount of gold available, then in practice £1 will be the money name not of 1/4 of an ounce of gold, but of 1/8 of an ounce. The effect is the same as if an alteration had taken place in the function of gold as the standard of prices. The values previously expressed by the price of £1 would now be expressed by the price of £2. Paper money is a symbol of gold, a symbol of money. Its relation to the values of commodities consists only in this. They find imaginary expression in certain quantities of gold, and the same quantities are symbolically and physically represented by the paper. Only insofar as paper money represents gold, which like other commodities has value, is it a symbol of value. Finally, one may ask why gold is capable of being replaced by valueless symbols of itself. As we have already seen, it is capable of being replaced in this way only if its function as coin or circulating medium can be singled out or rendered independent. Now, this function of being the circulating medium does not attain an independent position as far as the individual gold coins are concerned, although that independent position does appear in the case of the continued circulation of abraded coins. A piece of money is a mere coin, or means of circulation, only as long as it is actually in circulation. But what is not valid for the individual gold coin is valid for the minimum mass of gold which is capable of being replaced by paper money. That mass constantly haunts the sphere of circulation, continually functions as a circulating medium, and therefore exists exclusively as the bearer of this function. Its movement therefore represents nothing but the continued alternation of the inverse phases of the metamorphosis CMC, phases in which the commodity shape as a value confronts it only to disappear again immediately. The presentation of the exchange value of a commodity as an independent entity is here only a transient aspect of the process. The commodity is immediately replaced again by another commodity. Hence, in this process, which continually makes money pass from hand to hand, it only needs to lead a symbolic existence. Its functional existence, so to speak, absorbs its material existence. Since it is a transiently objectified reflection of the prices of commodities, it serves only as a symbol of itself, and can therefore be replaced by another symbol. One thing is necessary, however. The symbol of money must have its own objective social validity. The paper acquires this by its forced currency. The state's compulsion can only be of any effect within that internal sphere of circulation which is circumscribed by the boundaries of a given community, but it is also only within that sphere that money is completely absorbed in its function as medium of circulation, and is therefore able to receive, in the form of paper money, a purely functional mode of existence, in which it is externally separated from its metallic substance. Section 3. Money. The commodity which functions as a measure of value, and therefore also as a medium of circulation, either in its own body or through a representative, is money. Gold, or silver, is therefore money. It functions as money on the one hand when it has to appear in person as gold. It is then the money commodity, neither merely ideal, as when it is a measure of value, nor capable of being represented, as when it is the medium of circulation. On the other hand, it also functions as money when its function, whether performed in person or by representative, causes it to be fixed as the sole form of value, or in other words, as the only adequate form of existence of exchange value in the face of all the other commodities, here playing the role of use values pure and simple. Subsection A. Hoarding. The continuous circular movement of the two antithetical metamorphoses of commodities, or the repeated alternating flow of sale and purchase, is reflected in the unceasing turnover of money, in the function it performs of a perpetuum mobile of circulation. But as soon as the series of metamorphoses is interrupted, as soon as sales are not supplemented by subsequent purchases, money is immobilized. In other words, it is transformed, as Bois-Guilbert says, from mobile into immobile, from coin into money. When the circulation of commodities first develops, there also develops the necessity and the passionate desire to hold fast to the product of the first metamorphosis. This product is the transformed shape of the commodity, or its gold chrysalis. Commodities are thus sold not in order to buy commodities, but in order to replace their commodity form by their money form. Instead of being merely a way of mediating the metabolic process, this change of form becomes an end in itself. The form of the commodity in which it is divested of content is prevented from functioning as its absolutely alienable form, or even as its merely transient money form. The money is petrified into a hoard, and the seller of commodities becomes a hoarder of money. In the very beginnings of the circulation of commodities, it is only the excess amounts of use value which are converted into money. Gold and silver thus become of themselves social expressions for superfluity or wealth. This naive form of hoarding is perpetuated among those peoples whose traditional mode of production, aimed at fulfilling their own requirements, corresponds to a fixed and limited range of needs. This is true of the Asiatics, particularly of the Indians. Van der Linde, who imagines that the prices of commodities in a country are determined by the quantity of gold and silver to be found in it, asks himself why Indian commodities are so cheap. Answer: because the Indians bury their money. From 1602 to 1734, he remarks, they buried 150 million pounds worth of silver, which originally came from America to Europe. From 1856 to 1866, in other words in 10 years, England exported to India and China, but most of the metal exported to China flows back again to India, 120 million pounds in silver, which had been received in exchange for Australian gold. With more developed commodity production, every producer is compelled to secure for himself the nexus rerum, the social pledge. His needs are ceaselessly renewed and necessitate the continual purchase of other people's commodities, whereas the production and sale of his own commodity cost time and is subject to various accidents. In order, then, to be able to buy without selling, he must have sold previously without buying. This operation, conducted on a general scale, seems to involve a self-contradiction. But at the source of their production, the precious metals are directly exchanged for other commodities. And here we have sales, by the owners of commodities, without purchases, by the owners of gold or silver. And later sales again, without subsequent purchases, merely bring about a further distribution of the precious metals among all the owners of commodities. In this way, hoards of gold and silver of the most various sizes are piled up at all points of commercial intercourse. With the possibility of keeping hold of the commodity as exchange value, or exchange value as a commodity, the lust for gold awakens. With the extension of commodity circulation, there is an increase in the power of money, that absolutely social form of wealth which is always ready to be used. Quote, "Gold is a wonderful thing. Its owner is master of all he desires. Gold can even enable souls to enter paradise." End quote from Columbus in his letter from Jamaica in 1503. Since money does not reveal what has been transformed into it, everything, commodity or not, is convertible into money. Everything becomes saleable and purchasable. Circulation becomes the great social retort into which everything is thrown to come out again as the money crystal. Nothing is immune from this alchemy. The bones of the saints cannot withstand it, let alone more delicate Christian kings. Just as in money every qualitative difference between commodities is extinguished, so too for its own part, as a radical leveler, it extinguishes all distinctions. But money is itself a commodity, an external object capable of becoming the private property of any individual. The social power becomes the private power of private persons. Ancient society therefore denounced it as tending to destroy the economic and moral order. Modern society, which already in its infancy had pulled Pluto by the hair of his head from the bowels of the earth, greets gold as its holy grail, as the glittering incarnation of its innermost principle of life. The commodity, as a use value, satisfies a particular need and forms a particular element of material wealth. But the value of a commodity measures the degree of its attractiveness for all other elements of material wealth, and therefore measures the social wealth of its owner. To the simple owner of commodities among the barbarians, and even to the peasant of Western Europe, value is inseparable from the value form. Hence, an increase in his hoard of gold and silver is an increase in value. It is true that the value of money varies, whether as a result of a variation in its own value or a change in the value of commodities. But this, on the one hand, does not prevent 200 ounces of gold from continuing to contain more value than 100 ounces. Nor, on the other hand, does it prevent the metallic natural form of this object from continuing to be the universal equivalent form of all other commodities, and the directly social incarnation of all human labor. The hoarding drive is boundless in its nature. Qualitatively or formally considered, money is independent of all limits. That is, it is the universal representative of material wealth because it is directly convertible into any other commodity. But at the same time, every actual sum of money is limited in amount, and therefore only has a limited efficacy as means of purchase. This contradiction between the quantitative limitation and the qualitative lack of limitation of money keeps driving the hoarder back to his Sisyphean task, accumulation. He is in the same situation as a world conqueror who discovers a new boundary with each country he annexes. In order that gold may be held as money and made to form a hoard, it must be prevented from circulating, or from dissolving into the means of purchasing enjoyment. The hoarder therefore sacrifices the lust of his flesh to the fetish of gold. He takes the gospel of abstinence very seriously. On the other hand, he cannot withdraw any more from circulation in the shape of money than he has thrown into it in the shape of commodities. The more he produces, the more he can sell. Work, thrift, and greed are therefore his three cardinal virtues, and to sell much and buy little is the sum of his political economy. Alongside the direct form of the hoard, there runs its aesthetic form, the possession of commodities made out of gold and silver. This grows with the wealth of civil society. Quote, "Let us be rich, or let us appear rich," end quote from Diderot. In this way, there is formed on the one hand a constantly extending market for gold and silver, which is independent of their monetary functions, and on the other hand, a latent source of monetary inflow, which is used particularly in periods of social disturbance. Hoarding serves various purposes in an economy where metallic circulation prevails. Its first function arises out of the conditions of the circulation of gold and silver coins. We have seen how, owing to the continual fluctuations in the extent and rapidity of the circulation of commodities and in their prices, the quantity of money in circulation unceasingly ebbs and flows. This quantity must therefore be capable of expansion and contraction. At one time, money must be attracted as coin. At another time, coin must be repelled as money. In order that the mass of money actually in circulation may always correspond to the saturation level of the sphere of circulation, it is necessary for the quantity of gold and silver available in a country to be greater than the quantity required to function as coin. The reserves created by hoarding serve as channels through which money may flow in and out of circulation, so that the circulation itself never overflows its banks. Subsection B, means of payment. In the direct form of commodity circulation hitherto considered, we found a given value always presented to us in a double shape, as a commodity at one pole and money at the opposite pole. The owners of commodities therefore came into contact as the representatives of equivalents which were already available to each of them. But with the development of circulation, conditions arise under which the alienation of the commodity becomes separated by an interval of time from the realization of its price. It'll be sufficient to indicate the most simple of these conditions. One sort of commodity requires a longer, another shorter time for its production. The production of different commodities depends on different seasons of the year. One commodity may be born in the marketplace, another must travel to a distant market. One commodity owner may therefore step forth as a seller before the other is ready to buy. When the same transactions are continually repeated between the same persons, the conditions of sale are regulated according to the conditions of production. On the other hand, the use of certain kinds of commodity, houses for instance, is sold for a definite period. Only after the lease has expired has the buyer actually received the use value of the commodity. He therefore buys it before he pays for it. The seller sells an existing commodity. The buyer buys as the mere representative of money, or rather as the representative of future money. The seller becomes a creditor. The buyer becomes a debtor. Since the metamorphosis of commodities, or the development of their form of value, has undergone a change here, money receives a new function as well. It becomes the means of payment. The role of creditor, or of debtor, results here from the simple circulation of commodities. The change in its form impresses this new stamp on seller and buyer. At first, therefore, these new roles are just as transient as those of seller and buyer and are played alternately by the same actors. Nevertheless, this opposition looks less pleasant from the very outset, and it is capable of a more rigid crystallization. However, the same characteristics can emerge independently of the circulation of commodities. The class struggle in the ancient world, for instance, took the form mainly of a contest between debtors and creditors, and ended in Rome with the ruin of the plebeian debtors, who were replaced by slaves. In the Middle Ages, the contest ended with the ruin of the feudal debtors, who lost their political power together with its economic basis. Here, indeed, the money form, and the relation between creditor and debtor, does have the form of a money relation, was only the reflection of an antagonism which lay deeper at the level of economic conditions of existence. Let us return to the sphere of circulation. The two equivalents, commodities and money, have ceased to appear simultaneously at the two poles of the process of sale. The money functions now, first as a measure of value in the determination of the price of the commodity sold. The price fixed by contract measures the obligation of the buyer, i.e. the sum of money he owes at a particular time. Secondly, it serves as a nominal means of purchase. Although existing only in the promise of the buyer to pay, it causes the commodity to change hands. Not until payment falls due does the means of payment actually step into circulation, i.e. leave the hand of the buyer for that of the seller. The circulating medium was transformed into a hoard because the process stopped short after the first phase, because the converted shape of the commodity was withdrawn from circulation. The means of payment enters circulation, but only after the commodity has already left it. The money no longer mediates the process. It brings it to an end by emerging independently as the absolute form of existence of exchange value, in other words, the universal commodity. The seller turned his commodity into money in order to satisfy some need, the hoarder in order to preserve the monetary form of his commodity, and the indebted purchaser in order to be able to pay. If he does not pay, his goods will be sold compulsorily. The value form of the commodity, money, has now become the self-sufficient purpose of the sale, owing to a social necessity springing from the conditions of the process of circulation itself. The buyer converts money back into commodities before he has turned commodities into money. In other words, he achieves the second metamorphosis of commodities before the first. The seller's commodity circulates and realizes its price, but only as a title to money in civil law. It is converted into a use value before it has been converted into money. The completion of its first metamorphosis occurs only subsequently. The obligations falling due within a given period of the circulation process represent the sum of the prices of the commodities whose sale gave rise to those obligations. The quantity of money necessary to realize this sum depends in the first instance on the rapidity of circulation of the means of payment. The quantity is conditioned by two factors. First, the way in which relations between creditors and debtors interlock, as when A receives money from B who is in debt to him and then pays it out to his creditor C, and second, the length of time between the different days in which the obligations fall due. The chain of payments, or retarded first metamorphoses which participate in this process, is essentially different from that intertwining of the series of metamorphoses considered earlier. The flow of the circulating medium does not merely express the connection between buyers and sellers. The connection itself arises within and exists through the circulation of money. The movement of the means of payment, however, expresses a social connection which was already present independently. The fact that sales take place simultaneously and side by side limits the extent to which the rapidity of turnover can make up for the quantity of currency available. On the other hand, this fact gives a new impulse towards the economical use of the means of payment. With the concentration of payments in one place, special institutions and methods of liquidation develop spontaneously. For instance, the clearinghouses in medieval Lyon. The debts due to A from B, to B from C, to C from A, and so on, have only to be brought face to face in order to cancel each other out, to a certain extent, as positive and negative amounts. There remains only a single debit balance to be settled. The greater the concentrations of the payments, the less is this balance in relation to the total amount, hence the less is the mass of the means of payment in circulation. There is a contradiction immanent in the function of money as the means of payment. When the payments balance each other, money functions only nominally, as money of account, as a measure of value. But when actual payments have to be made, money does not come onto the scene as a circulating medium, in its merely transient form of an intermediary in the social metabolism, but as the individual incarnation of social labor, the independent presence of exchange value, the universal commodity. This contradiction bursts forth in that aspect of an industrial and commercial crisis, which is known as a monetary crisis. Such a crisis occurs only where the ongoing chain of payments has been fully developed, along with an artificial system for settling them. Whenever there is a general disturbance of the mechanism, no matter what its cause, money suddenly and immediately changes over from its merely nominal shape, money of account, into hard cash. Profane commodities can no longer replace it. The use value of commodities becomes valueless, and their value vanishes in the face of their own form of value. The bourgeois, drunk with prosperity and arrogantly certain of himself, has just declared that money is a purely imaginary creation. Commodities alone are money, he said. But now the opposite cry resounds over the markets of the world. Only money is a commodity. As the hart pants after fresh water, so pants his soul after money, the only wealth. In a crisis, the antithesis between commodities and their value form, money, is raised to the level of an absolute contradiction. Hence, money's form of appearance is here also a matter of indifference. The monetary famine remains, whether payments have to be made in gold or in credit money, such as banknotes. If we now consider the total amount of money in circulation during a given period, we find that for any given turnover rate of the medium of circulation and the means of payment, it is equal to the sum of prices to be realized, plus the sum of the payments falling due, minus the payments which balance each other out, and finally minus the number of circuits in which the same piece of coin serves alternately as medium of circulation and means of payment. The farmer, for example, sells his wheat for £2, and this money serves thus as a medium of circulation. On the day when the payment falls due, he uses it to pay for linen which the weaver has delivered. The same £2 now serves as the means of payment. The weaver now buys a Bible for cash. This serves again as the medium of circulation, and so on. Therefore, even when prices, speed of monetary circulation, and economies in the use of the means of payments are given, the quantity of money in circulation no longer corresponds with the mass of commodities in circulation during a given period, such as a day. Money which represents commodities long since withdrawn from circulation continues to circulate. Commodities circulate, but their equivalent in money does not appear until some future date. Moreover, the debts contracted each day and the payments falling due on the same day are entirely incommensurable magnitudes. Credit money springs directly out of the function of money as a means of payment, in that certificates of debts owing for already purchased commodities themselves circulate for the purpose of transferring those debts to others. On the other hand, the function of money as a means of payment undergoes expansion in proportion as the system of credit itself expands. As the means of payment, money takes on its own peculiar forms of existence, in which it inhabits the sphere of large-scale commercial transactions. Gold and silver coin, on the other hand, are mostly relegated to the sphere of retail trade. When the production of commodities has attained a certain level and extent, the function of money as means of payment begins to spread out beyond the sphere of circulation of commodities. It becomes the universal material of contracts. Rent, taxes, and so on are transformed from payments in kind to payments in money. The great extent to which this transformation is conditioned by the total shape of the process of production is shown, for example, by the twice repeated failure of the Roman Empire to levy all contributions in money. The unspeakable misery of the French agricultural population under Louis XIV, a misery so eloquently denounced by Bois Guilbert, Marshal Vauban, and others, was due not only to the weight of the taxes, but also to the conversion of taxes in kind into taxes in money. In Asia, on the other hand, the form of ground rent paid in kind, which is at the same time the main element in state taxation, is based on relations of production which reproduce themselves with the immutability of natural conditions. And this mode of payment, in its turn, acts to maintain the ancient form of production. It forms one of the secrets of the self-preservation of the Ottoman Empire. If the foreign trade imposed on Japan by Europe brings with it the transformation of rents in kind into money rents, then the exemplary agriculture of that country will be done for. Its narrowly based economic conditions of existence will be swept away. In every country, certain days become established as the dates on which general settlements are made. They depend, in part, leaving aside other circular movements described by reproduction, upon the natural conditions of production, which are bound up with the alternation of the seasons. They also regulate the dates for payments which have no direct connection with the circulation of commodities, such as taxes, rents, and so on. The fact that the quantity of money required to make these isolated payments over the whole surface of society falls due on certain days of the year causes periodic, but entirely superficial, perturbations in the economy of the means of payment. From the law of the rapidity of circulation of the means of payment, it follows that the quantity of the means of payment required for all periodic payments, whatever their source, is in direct proportion to the length of the periods. The development of money as a means of payment makes it necessary to accumulate it in preparation for the days when the sums which are owing fall due, while hoarding, considered as an independent form of self-enrichment, vanishes with the advance of bourgeois society. It grows at the same time in the form of the accumulation of a reserve fund of the means of payment. Subsection C. World money. When money leaves the domestic sphere of circulation, it loses the local functions it has acquired there, as the standard of prices, coin, and small change, and as a symbol of value, and falls back into its original form as precious metal in the shape of bullion. In world trade, commodities develop their value universally. Their independent value form thus confronts them here too as world money. It is in the world market that money first functions to its full extent as the commodity whose natural form is also the directly social form of realization of human labor in the abstract. Its mode of existence becomes adequate to its concept. Within the sphere of domestic circulation, there can only be one commodity which, by serving as a measure of value, becomes money. On the world market, a double standard prevails, both gold and silver. World money serves as the universal means of payment, as universal means of purchase, and as the absolute social materialization of wealth as such, universal wealth. Its predominant function is as means of payment in the settling of international balances, hence the slogan of the mercantile system, balance of trade. Gold and silver serve essentially as international means of purchase when the customary equilibrium in the interchange of products between different nations is suddenly disturbed. And lastly, world money serves as the universally recognized social materialization of wealth, whenever it is not a matter of buying or paying, but of transferring wealth from one country to another, and whenever its transfer in the form of commodities is ruled out, either by the conjuncture of the market or by the purpose of the transfer itself. Just as every country needs a reserve fund for its internal circulation, so too it requires one for circulation in the world market. The functions of hoards, therefore, arise in part out of the function of money as a medium of payment and circulation internally, and in part out of its function as a world currency. In this latter role, it is always the genuine money commodity, gold and silver in their physical shape, which is required. For that reason, Sir James Stewart expressly characterizes gold and silver as money of the world, in order to distinguish them from their merely local representatives. The stream of gold and silver has a twofold motion. On the one hand, it spreads out from its sources all over the world, and is absorbed to various extents in the different national spheres of circulation, where it enters into the various channels of internal circulation. There, it replaces abraded gold and silver coins, supplies the material for articles of luxury, and petrifies into hoards. The first movement is transmitted through the medium of direct exchange of the labor of individual countries, which has been realized in commodities for the labor realized in precious metals by the gold and silver producing countries. On the other hand, gold and silver continually flow backwards and forwards between the different national spheres of circulation, and this movement follows the unceasing fluctuations of the rate of exchange. Countries with developed bourgeois production limit the hoards concentrated in the strong rooms of the banks to the minimum required for the performance of their specific functions. Whenever these hoards are strikingly above their average level, this is, with some exceptions, an indication of stagnation in the circulation of commodities, i.e., of an interruption in the flow of their metamorphoses. End of Part 1.